I would get off the bus to come home, and he would be standing there with like seven of his other coworkers. So imagine getting off a bus and seeing seven military police standing there just waiting for you. And they would taunt me as I would get off the bus. It was horrible.
Welcome to Your Story Doesn't End Here, the mental health podcast for military and veterans. I'm your host, Rachel, and my mission with this podcast is to be a voice for those who don't have a voice, bring awareness to mental health issues, and provide value and solutions to help make life more abundant.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of Your Story Doesn't End Here. Today's guest is Beth. She spent 4 years in the Navy stationed in Italy as a hospital corpsman. She was sexually assaulted, and after reporting, the man almost killed. Beth, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I would love to hear your story and everything that you went through, and then just kind of take it from there. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I, like you said, spent 4 years in the military. I was in the Navy, and 2 years of my time was spent in Maryland. And in the mid 90s, early to mid 90s, I got stationed in Italy at a Navy base. And right from the beginning, I noticed there were a lot of guys coming to my barracks room from day one. From the moment my plane landed until I got in the dorm, I would have guys knocking on my door asking me, hey, do you want to go out and have a drink? Do you want to go to the clubs? And I had literally just gotten there. And of course, I was like, no. Well, I closed the door, and my roommate said, look, you have to be very careful here. They see you as basically new meat. I don't know any other way to put it. So, be very careful. Well, time went on, and I was kind of struggling with my own issues. I had basically just broken up with a previous boyfriend and lost a baby. And so drinking, it was pretty common in the military. And so I kind of hit the bottle kind of hard and went to the clubs a lot, had a good time. And, I tried to protect myself as much as I could. And then there was this one guy that I was just enamored with. He was like a military police officer. And I don't know, I was just enamored by him. Well, we ended up going out on a couple of dates, and then that was it. Nothing more really came of it. And time went on, time passed, a lot of time passed. And then a couple of things happened with him as time passed. I had moved on and gotten engaged to someone when I was there. And I went up to his office. There's an office that he had, and he shared it with a bunch of people. He ended up, because I needed to make copies of some documents for my homework at school, for school. It was the only computer that we had on base, or the only copy machine that we had on base at that time where I was living. So I went over there. I said, can I use the copy machine to make these copies? And he's like, yeah, sure, no problem. And it turned out he was the only one in there, nobody else, just me and him. And he ends up walking over to the door and locking it. And as I'm standing there making the copies, this guy just, took his hands and started just groping me. And I, told him to stop. Mind you, I had known him. I had gone out on a couple of dates with him. But that was had been like a year prior. And I was like, please stop. And so he did. And then I went and I sat down at the desk, trying to correlate my paperwork and stuff. And he started groping me again. And it went pretty far, to the point where he literally put his hands down my pants, up my shirt. And I was scared to death, like, because this guy, while he was a military police officer, he was also involved with NCIS, and he was pretty powerful on that base at the time. And you know, the other thing that kind of made me a little nervous was, I could feel his gun rubbing up against me. And, when you put those two things together, it made me nervous. And I just asked him to please stop. And I got the heck out of there as best as I could. I mean, I made an excuse. I'm like, just leave me alone. And I was able to get out, but it was really hard. And then I should kind of back up though. This guy did something else to me prior to this happening. It was just a repeated thing. So prior to this happening, I had mentioned that I had gone out on 2 dates with this guy. So on our second date, and this is prior to this event happening, on our second date, he took me to a park at night, and it was really, really dark. And he, of course, it was easy to get through security because he worked with them. So the guy, told us to come on through. We were the only people there. And I was like, oh, being like a young girl, I was like, oh, great. We're just going to like look at the stars and maybe have some wine or something. This is going to be nice. Well, what ended up happening was he ended up forcing himself upon me, and he raped me right there in the park. And the security guy came around because I guess they do their checks. And I was laying there and on the grass, and he was like, hey, are you guys okay? It's like he knew or something. And then this guy was like, oh yeah, we're fine, just go ahead. And after that, I was just like, can we please go? And I just begged him to just, let's go home. I need to go home. And so I left. We left. And that was my second date with this guy. And I don't even want to call it a date because the reality is that I was raped. And so that's when, fast forward some time, had gone by like a year. And that's when I went into the office, and I thought, to have my paperwork copied and stuff like that. I thought there was going to be more people. Turned out it was just this guy in there. So that's when the second event happened. I decided later, I was engaged to someone at that time, and he said that I should report it. And I said, I'm not reporting this. There's no way. This is a small, small base. Everybody's going to know. I'm going to get treated like crap. I'm not doing it. So he's like, no, you need to report it. So against my better judgment, I reported it. Now, of course, this guy saw it because he's military police. He's in charge of them. He's works with NCIS, he friggin' saw it. And that's when the harassment really ramped up and it got really bad. So after I made the report, NCIS wanted to interview me. And I shared with them everything that happened. I wrote it down. And I don't know, maybe a couple days later, the guy comes to me who did this. And he said, hey, I'll just make up a name. How's Elizabeth doing at NCIS? And then I knew, okay, nothing I said was incompetence. She freaking shared this information with him. And then, like I said, the harassment just got really, really nasty. I would get off the bus to come home, and he would be standing there with like 7 of his other coworkers. So imagine getting off a bus and seeing 7 military police standing there just waiting for you. And they would taunt me as I would get off the bus. It was horrible. I would go for jogs in the evening because, when you get off work, it's like 6 at night. And then, you gotta kind of settle in. I had to jog and run because, there's PRTs that you have to pass. In the evening was the only good time for me. And I felt like since I'm on base and it's a locked base, it's pretty safe. I wasn't worried about, any of the, civilians getting on base and hurting me. I felt very, very comfortable until I didn't. And I was jogging. I would go jogging, and these guys would, catcall me. They would just say some nasty stuff standing around. And it was his coworkers. And it got to the point where I couldn't even go jogging anymore. I just didn't feel safe. They would follow me in their cars on base while I was jogging. And I was just like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. We had drapes in our barracks, but they were thin drapes. They weren't really thick. And I had a friend come to me later, and this friend said, "Hey, you have a problem." And I said, "Well, what's wrong?" And he's like, "I just came from so-and-so's barracks room, and there's a video of you getting undressed." And I said, "What?" And it was all these guys that this guy worked with who took a video, because my barracks building was across the courtyard from the boys' barracks, from the guys' barracks. And it was like real easy. Like zooming in was not a big deal. So, I mean, through these, like, they were sheared drapes almost. I mean, you just don't have much. And they got me on video changing my clothes, and they were just drinking and sitting around and making fun and talking about it. And it just was horrible. It just felt really violating. And I reported it and nothing happened. Then I ended up getting a letter in the mail that was so sexually offensive. I had to save the letter, and I still have it to this day, but I have it for other reasons that I will talk about later. But I reported that and nothing happened. And it was this guy's friends who did this, his coworkers, the military police that he worked with. Nothing happened. So later on, I'm at a party and I'm with my friends, and wouldn't you know, it was probably like around New Year's. I think it was New Year's Eve. So we're at my friend's house, where this party is, and wouldn't you know, this guy shows up. I mean, like I said, it was a small base. Everybody knew everybody. And this guy just shows up with the rest of his military police friends. I looked at my friend and I said, "You know what? I'm gonna go outside and I'm gonna wait for you. I want to go home." And she's like, "All right, well, just give me a few minutes. I'm almost done here. Let me say goodbye to everybody and then I'll come out." And I was like, "Thank you." Well, I'm gonna tell you this story, and it's hard to tell. I went in the backyard, and it was dark. It was very dark. And I was petting a dog back there, like trying to comfort myself, because this guy was here with his friends who had been harassing me for a very long time. And he decides to come out in the backyard. He follows me to the backyard with probably 6 of his other military police coworkers. And then this is the thing that was like the worst ever. He began to throw M80s at me. Threw one, and I jumped out of the way, and I screamed. Threw another one, and I jumped. And then before I knew it, all 6 of these guys were throwing M80s at me. And all I can remember was screaming and asking them to stop. And I was crying and I felt like so trapped because when I went left, they went left with those M80s. When I went right to get away from them, they went right with the M80s. They were just cornering me is what they were doing. And they were laughing at me. And I'll never forget what he said, and that was, you shouldn't have said anything. You shouldn't have opened your mouth. And they just kept throwing them. And this went on for probably 30 minutes. 30 minutes. I guess until they ran out of it. And they laughed and then they walked away as if nothing happened. Well, let me tell you something. I don't know if anybody has ever heard an M80, but they are loud. And my ears rang and rang and rang for days. Well, I went to my commanding officer and I said, you've got to do something. You've got to get me out of here or get him out of here. There has to be something. And he told me, look, he's leaving in 4 months. He's going to be gone soon. Do your best to stay away from him. So for the rest of my time, I was relegated to my barracks room, and that's pretty much it. And everybody in my barracks, nobody would talk to me, not one person, because this guy just smeared my reputation so bad, and he swung the narrative his way so that it would be beneficial for him and made me look like a really bad person. So, over the years, I just stuffed it down. And I did my best to try not to think about it. And I tried to get into counseling once, and I just was scared. And finally, in 2015, I had had enough. I was like, no, I got to do something about this. So I started seeing a therapist, and then I really started seeing a therapist on a regular basis in 2017. And I, probably since 2015, I struggled very hard with my jobs. And, at the time, I didn't realize it was PTSD until the military told me, you have PTSD, among many other things. So it affected my job to the point where I'd be calling in sick all the time because I was depressed. And I would have to make up excuses at work as to why, because I couldn't say I was depressed. You can't say that. Oh, I'm depressed. I don't feel like coming in. No, you got to say you have a cold. You got to say you have a sinus infection. I had mentioned to my coworkers at the time, I'm just really bummed out and depressed. And then they started talking about it and they were like, oh God, she's depressed. Can you believe it? We're all depressed. And so again, that to me was very triggering because it was a trigger for me because, at current times, you're treating me the way I was treated in the military when this happened. So I'm not even getting the support where I work at. And I couldn't do it anymore. And I lost it. And I had to stop working. And lucky for me, the VA, rated me, and they've been very good to help me out for my mental health. But it has been a difficult road for me because, you think early 90s, mid 90s was a long time ago, right? And you stuffed it down all these years. But when you start going to therapy and they start pulling those layers and scabs off, it just all creeps back up. And consequently, I have PTSD. I have OCD. I have insomnia. I struggle from chronic nightmares, chronic panic attacks. I have something called depersonalization derealization disorder. And that is basically when you zone out. So, for an example, one time I was driving to Subway and I didn't know where I was. I didn't know where the hell I was. And so I had to stop and collect myself because I knew something was wrong. Or I was working in the office and I was doing something. And again, it was like I was in a dream. I could see myself doing what I was doing, but my mind wasn't there. It's hard to explain. And but it's an awful feeling. And my therapist told me how that's common with PTSD patients. Um, so it's a struggle. I have tinnitus in my ear, ringing in my ears. It's way worse in the right than it is the left. So much that I have hearing loss now in my right ear. I've had it for many, many years since that happened. And I have to wear hearing aids because I can't hear right. So yeah, that's what I've dealt with.
So Beth, just for context, and I really appreciate you sharing your story. I know you said you've been holding this down for many years and that it's been hard for you to bring this stuff back up. And so I appreciate that you're sharing with the audience what you've been through, because I promise you, you're not the only one that's been through what you've been through. And hearing these things helps other people know that I'm not alone, and might be the reason that someone else goes and seeks help. So thank you for having the courage to share your story. Just for context, that nothing ever happened with the perpetrator, correct?
No, nothing. Nothing whatsoever.
And so does that ever bother you still at times, knowing that that person is still out there and nothing ever happened?
It did for a while, but later I realized, I have a strong faith in God. And I just realized, you know what? Karma's a bitch. I really believe in karma. And you know what? Even if you don't believe in karma, I believe in God and he'll take care of him at the end of the day. I have to believe that. I have to believe that. This guy's got his own life. And, I would never wish ill will on anybody, but he was never held accountable. Yeah, it pisses me off. Yeah, it makes me mad. I tried and I tried hard. In fact, I have mounds of paperwork to prove it. In fact, when I applied for my MST through the VA, they were floored that I had paperwork. They said, nobody has paperwork. You actually have this? You reported it? Nobody reports these. And I was like, no, I did. But there's there's a caveat. I was almost killed. So yeah. Um yeah, it's I try not to think about him too much because I'm left dealing with the shit that he left me with. So
that's interesting that you say that. You went to the VA and they told you nobody has paperwork that comes for MST. And that's military sexual trauma for people that don't know.
yeah, so my MST coordinator said most people who apply for military sexual trauma disability, they don't have any paperwork at all because they didn't report it for obvious reasons. Nobody wants to report it. I didn't want to report it in the beginning, but my boyfriend, the guy, or my fiance at the time, who interestingly enough was military police, he said, no, you have to do this. You've got to do it. And so thank God for him.
Yeah, I think your story and so many other stories go to show why people, I can't just say women, but people have such a hard time reporting sexual assaults, even sexual harassment. Even today, I know what happened to you was years ago, but I don't think that it's gotten much better. Yes, we have the SAPR program now. We have avenues for people to report. And man, but I can't say that it's gotten better when we have cases like Vanessa Guillen, who got murdered after she was dealing with sexual assault and sexual harassment. There's army bases in Texas where they're finding dead bodies all over the place. Who knows how many of those are related to sexual trauma? And even if they aren't related to sexual trauma, no one should join the military service and get murdered by a fellow service member. You talked about feeling safe on base. I remember a time too when I first joined where I felt safe on base and then I didn't feel safe on base anymore. And so I think that it's happening to all too many people. It's been happening for way too long. And yeah, something needs to change.
Yeah, exactly. When I went in 91, I believe it was after Tailhook. You probably Do you remember Tailhook, or do you know anything about it? You're younger than me.
I was born in 92.
Oh my God, my son was born in 94. I feel really old. Anyway, yeah, so I went in a little bit after Tailhook, and I got to tell you, they did a great job at creating a facade that they were taking care of business. Every 6 months or so, we'd have, meetings where we would have to talk about sexual harassment, sexual assault. Don't say this, don't say that. But you know what? When those doors shut and our hour session was over, guess what happened? It all started back up. And I think, at least I felt at the time, that the military it's a boys' club. There's no place for women. In fact, if I had a daughter, her and I would sit down and have a serious conversation before she went in. And let me tell you, I am seriously patriotic. I really am. You don't get any more patriotic than me. But we would have to have that conversation. And to my understanding, like you said earlier, and my shock, it's still happening. And it was Vanessa Guillen. Is that how you say her last name?
I think so. Honestly, I'm not 100% sure, but I think so.
Let me tell you, that was a trigger for me. That was a huge, huge trigger. And I'm going to be very honest with you. I have a lot of triggers. I'm very hyper vigilant everywhere I go. I see shit that other people don't see. And but when that came out, that was really bad. And I was just like, how in the world is this still happening? How is this still? I thought they had all these programs in place. They're not doing anything about it. Nothing.
Yeah, it's still, you mentioned the boys' club. It's still like that. I think the places where I see it not so much the boys' club are the commands where there's a lot of females, but females that work well together. I think we still see kind of a dynamic of females that aren't great leaders in the military because they've been through their own traumas. And so that adds kind of another layer to leadership. But man, I had a conversation with someone a few weeks back talking about how PTSD is one of the things that I'm rated for on VA disability. And this person looked at me and was like, "You're not disabled." And borderline got upset that I get VA disability for really anything because I don't present as, your typical like physically disabled person. But people
Yep.
forget that mental illness is also a form of disability. And the military contributes to that a lot. And I personally think that if the military didn't want to pay out for PTSD, and if people had such a huge problem with military members getting paid out for PTSD, then maybe we should be more proactive about what's causing PTSD for service members and what's continually been the same cause for MST and PTSD for years and years. Nothing's changed. And that's a huge problem. But that's one of the reasons why I do this podcast, is because I think that there's a very huge lack of awareness. I think the military, you talked about the facade that the military portrays. The military has done a great job with marketing for years, from
Absolutely.
way back to World War II propaganda. Like, the military has its ways of getting people to join. And I have no problem with males, females, people in general joining the military. But you're right. I think that there needs to be, especially like if my daughter were to join, I would tell her how it is and what you need to prepare yourself for. And it's sad that those conversations need to be had. But I think had I gone in with a different understanding of what I was getting myself into, I probably wouldn't have been so naive to it. And I would have had my guard up more. And realistically, it shouldn't be like that. I think everyone should be comfortable to go to their workplace, male or female, and not feel like they need to have their guard up because they might be sexually assaulted. That should never be a thing.
Yeah, exactly. And, I mean, even before all this happened, I was sexually harassed. I mean, God, I can't tell you how many times somebody would grab my butt while I'm in uniform. I'm like, really?
Yep.
Or they would say certain things and you're like, whoa, that was way off color. And I'm not talking like, I don't know. They were really sexually explicit things. Yeah. And that occurred my entire 4 years that I was in. But I do want to say that while sexual assault, rape, everything happens in the military to women, the majority of them, I think, are women. There are more men coming forward. And it does happen to the men. And they don't talk about it. And they don't talk about it, for obvious reasons. They don't, their masculinity might be at stake, they think. But it does. It happens to them too.
Yeah.
So, I think the military needs to do something. They need to up their game to prevent this from happening to women and men alike.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's talks. I haven't followed up on it much, but the last I knew is that there was talks of the military bringing investigations outside of the military. So no longer having commands investigating sexual assault cases, no longer having anyone affiliated with the military investigating these cases. I think that when we add military members in when it comes to military sexual trauma, now all of a sudden you open up the door for things like what happened to you. Whether it's just judging, starting rumors, really anything, we have these sexual assault prevention representatives in different commands. And I think it's great that they're trying to create collateral duties out of this. And, but I think it's too, what is the word? I don't know what word to use. I don't think it's something that should be within the military system. I think it should be an outside entity handling these things. I think people would be more comfortable to come forward, and then maybe the statistics would be more accurate. We look at statistics right now and they're like, oh, it's one in however many, I don't know the statistics, one in however many women and men are sexually assaulted in the military. I know that there's way, way more than that. It's probably realistically more like 90% experience it at some point. And so what do you think would be more helpful, I guess, based off of your experiences when it comes to these things?
Yeah, so I think what you said and what the military is proposing is having the investigations come off base. I think that's a start. It's a start in the right direction. I do think there could be potential backlash. Still, somebody's going to find out that you went to the police department in the county or wherever it is. And, I mean, they might find out, and then the rumors are going to spread around base. So I don't know. I mean, again, it's a start in the right direction, and they're going to have to do something to make people feel more comfortable coming forward. I don't know what that is. And I think it's always going to, unfortunately, by putting these things in place, by having outside investigations and making people feel more comfortable, despite all that, it's still going to exist in some form or fashion. It'll never go away.
Yeah.
So I think the other thing is making sure sailors, soldiers, whoever feel comfortable asking for mental health care. That's the key too. Don't make fun of people. Don't judge them. I talked about being judged at my civilian job, my most recent civilian job, judged very, very harshly. It's important. We've got to pull that stigma away. And then, I'm gonna go off on a tangent here and say it's not just the military, as a society, we need to do better in taking away that stereotype for mental illness, because the stuff that we went through caused it. So, it's not fair that you judge us for that. So
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that brings up a point to focus more on the preventative things too, right? Educating people better. I think that the education right now is just, it's subpar. I don't think people fully understand what sexual assault is still. I think a lot of that goes back to the way that people were raised. When you have a military environment, you have people from all walks of life, and some people legitimately just don't understand that touching that person's butt is not appropriate for the workplace. It might have been considered appropriate where, in the small town that you grew up in, but it's not appropriate for the workplace in the military, but no one's stopping it. Because you talked about your experience. I had a similar experience happen to me when I was in the Navy, and no one said anything. Everyone just kind of laughed it off. And so educating people better, creating better people, both military and civilian, I think that's really the best place to start. And then holding each other accountable. It shouldn't just be up to the authorities. I don't think that people feel empowered to speak up, but by speaking up and letting that person know, like, hey, we're not standing up for what you're doing, we're not entertaining the idea of what you're doing, that takes their power away. And then maybe they'll think twice about doing something like that ever again. And so, I mean, that's what I can think of. And I think it's a start. You're right. But I think it's going to take some time.
I agree.
Yeah. So, Beth, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your story. Again, without people like you, this podcast doesn't exist. And I know it's not easy. I still have yet to share my sexual assault story on the show because it's really not easy to do. So, you do have so much of my gratitude for sharing just a little piece of your story with the world. So thank you.
No problem. I don't know. Hopefully it will encourage other people to come forth, and maybe it will encourage currently enlisted people to report what happened. It's okay.
Absolutely.
So,
it is.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, it is 100% okay for anyone listening. And if you are experiencing sexual assault or have experienced sexual assault, I always post phone numbers and any relevant resources in the show notes. If you ever want to reach out for more resources, I know people, I have resources I can point you in the right direction. Go to www.ysdeh.com. You can fill out the contact form, and I will do my best to point you in the right direction to get you the help that you need. But appreciate everyone for listening in on today's episode, and we will see you next week.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen in today. Each week, I'll be bringing you value in the mental health space and its direct impact on service members and veterans. If you feel you personally got value today from this episode, it would mean the world to me if you would leave a 5-star rating and review and share this to your audience. Until next time, remember, your story matters, your mental health matters, and your story doesn't end here.